Hey guys, this is AP World History, Tradition and Change in East Asia, Chapter 26. So today we're going to focus on the Qin Dynasty and on what is going on in Japan at this time. So remember, we're still in period 4, which is 1450 to 1750. So the Qin Dynasty will last all the way up until the end of World War I. So very important. One of the longer lasting empires of China. Let's go ahead and get started. So, of course, it's going to start for the quest for political stability. And to really understand where the Qin Dynasty or the Qing Dynasty came from, we need to look at the fall of the Ming Dynasty. So the Ming government, we see the Yuan falls, obviously. So even before the Ming was the Yuan, which were the Mongols. And then the Ming will come in, restore order by Hongwu, and he will bring back China to what it used to be, this very tightly centralized government. He's going to use the mandarins and the eunuchs because eunuchs cannot reproduce. They cannot have families, so he'll use them under the government to make sure that there's loyalty there. In order to prevent invasions, they'll also move the capital from Nanjing to Beijing. And it was going to be ineffective to Mongol invasions. So what they begin to do is the Ming Dynasty are the ones that build the Great Wall of China. This is the Great Wall right here. And they're doing it so they can protect themselves against the northern invaders. They wanted, the other thing they wanted to do was they wanted to eradicate any Mongol or foreign influence in the Ming Dynasty. So they're able to do this through the help of that Great Wall. And like I said, they're going to restore Chinese tradition, especially the Confucian tradition, the Confucian civil service exams, the Confucian school system, the Confucian philosophy that the Chinese follow. We also see at the end the Ming decline, and the reason they decline is for various reasons. We see pirates and smugglers come into the dynasty. As well as this, we also see that they are ineffective against the defense of these pirates, of these smugglers, of outsiders, because they have an inept government, a government that is not necessarily functioning for them. On top of that, they're suffering, they're going through a famine, and the government does not know how to pretty much protect them or help them because they're so disorganized. And this is going to lead into the Manchus coming in from the north and pretty much taking over. And the Manchus even had the support of the Ming military officials to come in and invade them because they were seeing that the Ming government wasn't doing anything. So your first question, why was the Great Wall created? So the Qing Dynasty, the Qing, however you want to say it, they are started by the Manchus. So very important. Please remember that. Please, please, please. The Manchus start the Qing Dynasty. Okay, and Qing or Qing means pure. So Narachi, who is the leader of the Manchus, he will unify them and create this dynasty. And it will create laws and a powerful military, and the dynasty will be established through this, through the military and the Chinese support. And again, the Chinese are going to support them because anything is better than what they have right now, what they had with the Ming Dynasty. So they will preserve, the Manchus will preserve their own identity. They will not allow the Chinese to intermarry with them, and they will not even allow the Chinese to go and visit Manchuria, which is the Manchus' main area. But again, remember, they are the ones that the Manchus start the Qing Dynasty. So Kangxi and his reign, Kangxi was one of the first rulers of the Manchus. He was an effective leader, a Confucian scholar, and he wanted to implement the Confucian policies. He was a conqueror of Taiwan, where the Ming loyalists retreated. So they were very successful in conquering Taiwan, and his grandson will later take over after him, sorry. So Qianlong and his reign, so this is the height. With Qianlong as the leader, this is the height of the Qing Dynasty. And they liked him because he was able to cancel the taxes 4 times. He was able to be a wealthy and well-organized leader. But towards the end of his reign, because things were going so good and he felt he didn't have to pay attention to things, he kind of, got distracted with other things besides the government. And he thought, well, the eunuchs can handle the government, they can deal with all of that. But in the end, it wasn't going to be that way. So, question 2 or statement 2, talk about the leaders of the Qing dynasty. What did they do? Why were they successful? So the next thing we see is the Son of Heaven and the scholar bureaucrats. So the Son of Heaven is similar to the mandate of heaven, okay? The idea that the human being is being designated by heavenly powers to maintain order on earth. Again, if you have the mandate of heaven, then you claim the Son of Heaven. And a lot of the times, if you are this ruler, this emperor, the Son of Heaven, your daily life is super structured, super organized, because you are being presented in a certain way to others. So activities are choreographed. If you're going to have visitors, they're going to do the kowtow, which is, kneeling and prostrating in front of you to recognize your authority. So while you have the emperor, you also have a group of bureaucrats who are helping him as well. These were known as the scholar bureaucrats, and they dealt with the day-to-day affairs of the land, of the empire, okay? They had degrees that were earned by the Confucian civil service exam, and these were extremely long tests that you had to take over several days, and you pretty much had to bring everything with you. The food, your drink, your bedding, everything you had to take with you. And they would start prepping these kids at an early age, like about at age 11 or 12, just to get ready to take this exam. And they would have to memorize a lot of books on Confucianism. So when they were ready to take these exams, they had to pretty much take several 8-legged tests, which were several essays that they had to write. And the tests were at the district, provincial, and metropolitan levels, which meant that if you were going to pass the exam, you were going to pass it and be in one of those positions. So 300 would usually pass the metropolitan exam, and that was probably the best job that you could get. And a lot of the times, the men that tried out for this exam, they would have to take it several times just to pass. Like I said, it was 3 days, 2 nights writing. You had those long essays. It was highly competitive. And it was highly competitive because it was open to anybody. And if you passed, then you were going to get a good position. If you didn't get that metropolitan position, you would probably work in the district or as a teacher or on the more city level. So passing does not always guarantee a position, but it does guarantee that you would have some sort of job. And the civil service examinations, like I said, it opens doors because everybody could practice it, and it really is the heart of Chinese education at this time. This is what you were aiming for in terms of education. Okay, so looking at economic and social classes, of course you should know that China is a patriarchal family, and filial piety is a big part of China. So filial piety is that the children have duties to their fathers. But this idea of filial piety can also be applied in the larger scale, that as citizens, you also have a duty to your emperor as well. So again, on a smaller scale, in terms of the family, that you as children have a duty to your father, and that on a larger scale, you as citizens have a duty to the society, to the emperor, I'm sorry. So Chinese family was hierarchical and patriarchal and authoritarian, meaning that there were levels. All right, and there were different relationships that played a role. The father-son relationship, the father-mother relation, the father-wife or the husband-wife relationship. Those were all levels in this hierarchical family structure. And of course, the Chinese society is highly patriarchal, where the man is in charge and has the total authority. There also, you see, is the ancestor veneration, which supports the patriarchy, where you're praying to your ancestors that have passed away, asking them for help in your daily lives. And clans would develop support needs beyond nuclear families. So you also see this idea of filial piety on a more local level as well. In regards to gender relations, women, again, were under men, and even that meant for having kids, that boys were going to be preferred over girls. They found that girls were more of a liability. You would have to wonder, well, who is going to care for them when they're married? And if they don't get married, then you would have to continually care for them as well. So at times you even see infanticide being performed if they had girls because they preferred the boys over the girls. Remember, infanticide is when they would kill the little babies. Widows were also discouraged to remarry, and sometimes it was seen as an honor to commit suicide to follow the husband to the grave. So, almost similar to that of India early on, where we see the women throw themselves on the pyre when their husbands are being burned after they die. Similar in that respect. Another way that they showed patriarchy was through this foot binding. So it originated in the Song dynasty, the idea of foot binding, and it was the idea that it did not support a woman's weight, so a woman was always going to need somebody to take them around. They're continually going to need help. And a lot of times you saw this in the wealthy classes. Sometimes you would see it in commoners just so they could enhance their social standing. They would do this, and it was marriage and contractual and extended the male lineage as well under this whole idea of patriarchy. And under the whole idea of patriarchy too is that women could not divorce. So question 4, discuss filial piety in the larger perspective. Okay, moving on to population growth and economic development. So this is period 4, which we know the Columbian exchange has happened, and the triangular trade is also happening. So goods are moving back and forth throughout the world now. In terms of foods that they're receiving, China will receive American maize and sweet potatoes and peanuts from the Americas. That's what they will plant and harvest in their land that they receive from the Americas. And it's, of course, going to increase food supply, which means there's going to be population growth. And this is going to lead to social and economic problems because they cannot keep pace with the population in terms of providing for them and taking care of them, the government taking care of them. However, it also leads to commercial markets that give opportunities for entrepreneurs saying, hey, you know what, I can be a merchant and sell these items as well. So good and bad side to the American food crops coming in. With regard to foreign trade, we see global trade leads to prosperity for China, and a lot of that trade happens in the Indian Ocean basin, Central Asia, and Europe. China does not really import much, meaning they don't bring in a lot because a lot of the time they feel they can take care of themselves, that they're self-sufficient, and it's more that they're exporting their goods, their commodities like silk. So Zheng He's expeditions were stopped by the eunuchs. Remember, we had talked about this the other day, but it did not necessarily stop trade. So entrepreneurship, the idea of, independent merchants that are not connected to the government, they still traded. Even though the government did not allow for large commercial ventures, they were still doing that on islands off of China. So trade and migration in Southeast Asia, merchants work individually or in partnership. So if they're going to do this trading, they're going to either do it on their own or they're going to get together with a group of people. Some of the areas that they would go to were Manila, the VOC, the colony of Batavia, Philippines, Malaya, Thailand. So pretty much all the Southeast Asian islands. And the economy took over technological innovation because they were interacting still, these traders, they were getting stuff from Europe. They were seeing the technologies that were occurring in Europe, and they were trying to bring those into China, incorporate them. So they adopted that European weaponry that was initially based off of China, and technologically they slowed down due to those government priorities. So again, these traders tried to at least help China get back on track with Europe, but it was never really going to be that way because the government saw that they had to focus on more important things, at least in their eyes, and that technology was not always the most important. And of course, like I said, the government is going to favor that politics and social issues over the technology. So questions 5 and 6, global trade led to what? And why did technology slow down in China? So moving on from the economy to the society and the way the society is organized, there were privileged classes that existed, and at the very top, we're going to see the scholar bureaucrats and gentry at the highest positions in Chinese society. So this is a good little diagram to look at so you can understand where everybody belongs. Much in common came from the gentry ranks. You had intermediaries between imperial government and local society that were easily identifiable by the clothes that they wore. And they also got this privileged status. So if you were in that scholar bureaucrat, that gentry class, You were going to be a part of the higher echelon here of society. Next, we see the working classes, and they categorize them in three ways: the peasants, the artisans are workers, and the merchants. So Confucian saw peasants as more honorable than the merchants because they felt that the peasants were, working on the farmland and they were doing more for the society as a whole than a merchant who was just doing for himself. Artisans and workers, these were usually employees of the state or from gentry and merchant families. And then at the bottom right here, we see the merchant class as well. And the bottom of the Confucian social hierarchy secretly gained support for their enterprises, meaning that, yeah, maybe the merchants who were the traders were not viewed as the best according to this hierarchy, but they also knew that they were the ones bringing in the money. So sometimes there would be, this secret support to the merchants. And unlike Europe, Chinese did not support those merchants on a large scale. So you don't see the government funding them, or you don't see them making large enterprises like, the East Indian Company or anything like that. And then at the very bottom, you have the mean people, and these were the military, prostitutes, entertainers that they felt were just kind of, not necessarily contributing in the right way to Chinese society. So, question 7: what were the three working classes of China? Okay, so moving on to the Confucian tradition and new cultural influence, we see the development of Neo-Confucianism, and that's really a mixture of Confucianism and Buddhist values together. Okay, so just keep that in mind, it's a mix. And it provided funding for Chinese cultural traditions as well. We see something develop called popular culture. Not everybody in China wanted to read Confucian works. So people began to kind of write novels that were for entertainment purposes, just kind of for fun to read. And these were known as the popular novels. The Confucian scholars looked down on these novels because sometimes they were kind of, they didn't see any use to them, let's put it this way. They thought like they were vulgar, or they were tales about horror, wonder, excitement. And that's really what they were, though. They were there to just pass the time and enjoy something outside of the world they lived in. So it offered reflection on human affairs. All right, so question 8, Chinese government. Talk about the Chinese government on Confucianism. And what was Pulp Fiction? So as China is developing, you see some attempts at conversion through the Christians, especially with Matteo Ricci. He was a prominent missionary. He was a Jesuit missionary, to be more specific, and he tried to convert a lot of Chinese people to Christianity. It really didn't work. However, the government really did enjoy his presence. He was very learned, very smart, very diplomatic, and like I said, he was well liked by the Ming Dynasty when he was there. Well versed in Chinese culture, he learned, how to read and write in Chinese, and he helped the Chinese correct some mistakes in their scientific thought, like with the calendars and with the bronze cannons. But he never really was able to convert many. He tried to catch Chinese interest through science and technology. That's where the way or the route he thought that he would be able to convert people, but it obviously didn't work. And he argued that Chinese culture was similar to Christianity in a way to convert them, but again, didn't work. So he never really gained a lot of followers. So the end of the Jesuit mission. Jesuit missions end due to internal disagreements on, kind of what they were doing there. Other missionaries also saw them as like, hey, well, you're not letting us, convert Chinese people to Christianity either. So other missionaries complained about the tolerance of Chinese traditions, saying, well, you're being too relaxed on the Chinese, and if they're going to convert, they need to fully convert to Christianity. So though conversion is unsuccessful, you did at least have these cultural exchanges between the Chinese and the Christians, the European Christians. And Europe, again, will give China science and technology, and China gave Europe rational thought and the use of the civil service exam. because a lot of the times in Europe, people were just passing down power without necessarily having people who were of worth, of value, and smart enough to take those positions. It's almost like, okay, well, I'm just going to give you this position because you're my brother, not because you actually know how to do the position. So when they went to China and they saw that they had to actually take exams for their jobs, they thought, you know what, this may be a better route to go to. So the last section we're going to look at is the unification of Japan. And that starts with the Tokugawa shogunate, in particular Tokugawa Ieyasu. So a powerful state will emerge, unifying into a unified land, because during this time, pretty much Japan is like having a lot of little local rulers in charge. So Ieyasu will establish the Tokugawa Bakufu, and the Bakufu is a tense government. It's not necessarily like a totally complete real centralized government, but it's a government that's kind of trying to keep everything together in Japan. So Tokugawa shoguns aim to prevent civil war and control the daimyo. So the daimyo are these territorial leaders who rule most of Japan, and you see them throughout all of Japan. And the daimyo were absolute rulers in their land, and they had their own little governments in there. So the question is, how do we control the daimyo so they don't fight against each other? So the shoguns will attempt to control the daimyo by instituting policies of, one, alternate attendance. So what they had to do was, the daimyo, they had to go, their families were in Edo, and every other year they had to be in court, meaning they had to be in the area of Edo and living there. Other policies they did to enforce control over the daimyo was they would have marriage alliances. So maybe one daimyo has a daughter, and then another daimyo has a son, and they have those two, the son and daughter, marry. So they'll establish an alliance, and they won't give reason to attack each other. In addition to those marriage alliances, we also see controlled visits by the shoguns to make sure everything is going well. And if the daimyo ever wanted to have major construction or do major infrastructure in the area, they would also have to seek permits from the shogun, from the main area. With regards to foreign relations, Japan restricted foreign relations for 200 years in their area, and it really is going to set them back. And it will expel Europeans from Japan and forbid any trade in the ports. So there's still local trade, though, that happens. And there's also trade in like islands off of Japan as well. So looking at Japan and the economic social change, we see population growth because of more agriculture and farming. Many practice population control. Remember, Japan is an island, and as we're getting more farming going, that means obviously more people, and we don't have enough space for them. So they practice population control to maintain or raise the standard of living. Some people would marry late. You had the use of contraception or even abortion. They also did something called thinning out of the rice shoots, which essentially was infanticide as well. So maybe if they wanted a son, but they got a daughter, then, they would do the infanticide to let go of the daughter. For social change, we see ushered in peace leads warriors to take on new government positions. So there's not really a need for so many military positions, and they try to kind of pay them off or get them to move into government positions. The daimyo and the samurai live inexpensive lives, and they will become indebted to rice brokers because they kind of just waste their money. Merchants, however, will become wealthy because, like I said, they do practice trade still, and the wealth allowed for social mobility. So you can move up in terms of your social status. All right, so question 12, what is thinning out of the rice shoots? So the next thing we're going to look at is Neo-Confucianism and the floating worlds. So Japan, like China, also followed Neo-Confucianism, that mix of Buddhism and Confucian ideas together, and it will become the ideology of the Bakufu, of that tent government. Native learning. So even though the Japanese did borrow from the Chinese, there was a big push to recognize the culture and tradition of Japan itself. So Neo-Confucianism did not dominate intellectual life, and some wanted to create the cultural identity of Japan separate from the influence of China. They didn't want to be a Chinese puppet, essentially, or a mini China. So this idea of native learning, which emphasized the folk tradition, the Shinto religion superiority over others, and they were xenophobic. Xenophobic means that you have a fear of another race or another group of people. They really practiced and emphasized those things in Japan to kind of maintain their own identities. So, floating world, this was essentially areas to get away from social responsibilities and rules of social conduct. I'm sorry. Um, so this is really like what you're going to do for your leisure time in Japan. A lot of pop culture was urban and satirical and secular. You had new forms of drama like the kabuki theater. This is an image of the kabuki theater. And it was really about like body skits, like really risque theater plays. You would see dancing. It was like a big spectacle. And then you also had the puppet theater as well. But these floating worlds were, these things where you'd go to get away, whether it be to the kabuki theater, whether it be what you're reading, whether it be you engaging in, going to brothels or bars and that kind of thing. All right, so the last thing is going to be the Christianity and Dutch learning. So Christian missions, so before they totally became xenophobic and didn't want, anybody around them and isolated themselves, you did see Christians contribute to Japan. St. Francis Xavier saw success in some conversion. However, as that native learning comes in and like really takes hold in Japan, it's going to create a backlash, and they're going to pretty much kick out all the Christians. Either you leave or you're going to get beheaded or they're going to hang you or something. So fear European alliance with daimyo would lead to the destabilization, and that's really why they kicked him out. A lot of these anti-Christian campaigns happened from 1887 to 1639, and many decree the halt of the Christian missionaries. And if you were Christian, you were told to like denounce your faith, or you would probably also get killed. And like I said, it's going to lead to that painful death. So the last thing we see here is the Dutch learning, and that was what it sounds like. Interaction with Dutch merchants were the only way to make contact with the outside world. And this contact was known as Dutch learning because they were learning new things from the Dutch. Not that the Dutch were giving them like Dutch traditions or Dutch culture, but like the Dutch were bringing in like the new things that were happening in the world to them. So that's what Dutch learning was. So it was European art influence, study of anatomy and botany in Japan through this Dutch learning. All right, so that is chapter 26. Please make sure that you answer all the discussion questions that are there, and make sure that you get a good understanding of the Manchus, who they are, where they came from, and pretty much the culture for the most part stays the same. And make sure you understand the social structures that you see as well. Okay, we'll see you guys the next time.